Hey everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to crochet this lovely tulip flower. It works up quickly, making it a great project for beginners and more experienced crocheters too, so you can make one or make a whole bouquet. So the pattern calls for DK weight yarn. It takes approximately 6 grams in the lilac color and about 2 grams in the pastel green color. You'll also need a 3mm hook, some craft wire, and hot glue or other paste, and your normal crochet items like yarn needles, stitch markers, and stuffing. However, the gauge doesn't matter much. You can use any size yarn and matching hook size as long as you adjust the yardage of yarn accordingly. If you're using a larger weight yarn and larger hook size, you'll end up using a bit more yarn. So for today's video, I'm using a 4mm crochet hook and worsted weight yarn. If you haven't already, be sure to snag the matching greeting card to make an adorable and one-of-a-kind gift that your friends and family will love. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so we are getting started on the tulip's flower. I'm going to be using this purple lilac colored yarn. And the first thing that we need to do is get a magic ring formed. So let's do a quick review on how to tie a magic ring, and then how to make our first few single crochet stitches inside. Alright, so let's review how to form a magic ring. So we're going to start by taking a little length of our yarn, and I'm using white for this demonstration. Make sure you're using the correct color for the pattern that you are following along with. So I'm going to take this white, and I'm going to reserve myself a little bit of a tail. So I'm going to take the end of that yarn, and I'm going to stretch it so I've got about 5 inches or so of a tail. And the tail is going to be the end that is not attached to our ball of yarn. So once we've got about 5 inches or so reserved of that tail, we're going to take our yarn hand. For me, that's my left hand, but if you're a left-handed crocheter, this might be your right hand. But we're going to take our yarn hand and make a bit of a finger guns here. So my index and my middle finger, I'm going to put them together, and I'm going to be looking at the inside of them. Then I'm going to take that tail that I've reserved, that 5 inches, and I'm going to lay it so that it's over the lower digit on my index and my middle. And then I'll take my thumb and I'm going to press the yarn to those 2 fingers. Then I'm going to take my hook hand, which is for me my right hand, but could be your left hand, and I'm going to grab the working yarn. Once I've got that grabbed, I'll take it and I'm going to wrap it around the back side of my index and my middle finger so that it's sort of close to that top digit. I'll flip my hand over so you can see. So I want it to be close to my top digit, so you can see it's closer to the 2 tops of my fingers here. So we're going to wrap that around, and then once we've got it around the top digit of those 2 fingers, we're going to bring it so that it goes behind our thumb again. So I use my thumb and I pinch that second wrap in place. Then we're going to keep wrapping, this time going around the lower digit on our 2 fingers. So I'll flip my hand over so you can see these 2 wraps here. This is that one I just made, going around that lower digit. So we'll wrap around that lower digit, and then we're going to take our working yarn and one more time snug it behind our thumb, and then just pull it out of our way. So once we've done that, we should have 2 wraps and this sort of X shape on the insides of our hands. So once we have all of the yarn wrapped around our yarn hand here, we're ready to take our crochet hook in our hook hand, and we're going to flip our yarn hand over so that we're looking at the back side of our fingers. So we should have 2 wraps, one around the top digit, one around the lower digit on our yarn hand. We're going to take our hook and slip it underneath that top wrap, and then use the hook part to snag that lower wrap and bring it underneath the top wrap. Then we're going to take both of our hands and we're going to flip them over so that we're looking at the inside and away from our body. So I'm flipping out and away from my body. And then I'm going to bring my 2 hands together, so my yarn hand and my hook hand. I'm going to bring them so the index finger here on my hook hand can touch the back side of my yarn hand. Then using the thumb and index finger of my hook hand, I'm going to grab both the wrap on my hook and the wrap still on my fingers right where they meet. So I'm going to kind of snag the 2 of them together right there. Once I've got those pinched between my thumb and index finger on my hook hand, I can let go with my thumb and then gently slide those wraps off of my index and middle finger. So now that I've done that, let's locate both the tail, that's the end that's no longer attached to our ball of yarn, so it's got this blunt cut end on it. And we're going to kind of pull that over into the 12 o'clock position, so kind of up and away. And then let's locate the working yarn. That's the stuff still attached to our ball of yarn. So once we've got those two identified, we're going to take the working yarn and begin tensioning it. So to do that, we'll take our index finger on our yarn hand. That for me is my left hand. Could be your right hand for you if you're a left-handed crocheter. And we're going to slip the working yarn over the top of our index finger. Then we'll take our middle, ring, and pinky finger on our yarn hand, and we're going to wrap those around that working yarn. Once you've done that, we also need to sandwich this working yarn in between our magic ring and our tail. So to do that, I like to take my middle finger and thumb on my yarn hand, and I'm going to grab that tail with my middle finger here. And then with my thumb, I want to grab the ring. So we don't want to grab our working yarn, which is kind of going in through that ring. We want to just get the bottom end of the ring here. And once you've got those two, we're going to kind of pinch them together. And you can see that sandwiches our working yarn in between the two of them. Once we've got those grabbed with our yarn hand, we can let go with our index and thumb on our hook hand. And the ring here that's on our hook is really loose. We'll tighten that by pulling our index finger up and away. You can see how that tightens that yarn. And then once we've done that, we're ready to yarn over and draw through the loop on our hook. So we'll take our hook, put the yarn over our hook, so I kind of just swing around the back side there and grab it. And we're going to pull that working yarn directly through the loop on our hook. Once we've done that, you can let go. It's not going to come undone. It won't come untied, which is very comforting because we've spent all this time creating it. The last thing we need to do before we're ready to begin is we're going to take the tail, and you can see it's threaded through our magic ring. We're going to take that tail and we're going to pull it out from the center of that ring. And from here, we're ready to begin working in the magic ring. We also need to work over the tail as well. So we'll take that ring and we'll take the tail and we're going to set them together so that we are working over both of these strands, the ring and the tail. All right, you are ready to go ahead and continue on in your pattern. All right, so now that I have my magic ring formed, I'm ready to start in on round 1. And round 1, we need to place 6 single crochet stitches inside of this magic ring and also over the tail that we used to tie our ring. So to start, we're going to go ahead and take our index finger on our hook hand and use it to hold the loop on our hook in place as we take our hook and push it from front to back through the ring and underneath that tail. You can see I've got them pinched together here in my yarn hand between my thumb and my middle finger. Then I'm going to take my crochet hook and I'm going to swing it around and over my yarn. So I'm yarning under or hooking over and then pulling that yarn through the ring and up into a nice tall loop here on my crochet hook. Then I'm going to yarn over, so swing my hook around the back side of the yarn and grab it, and then use it to pull it through those 2 loops left on my crochet hook. And that is our first single crochet stitch, which we need to mark with our stitch marker. So we'll take our marker and slip it underneath both the front and the back loop of that V shape here, and then click it in place. We want to mark the first stitch of our round to help us keep track of where we are in our pattern, because when we crochet amigurumi projects, it's going to kind of spiral around and around. So if you don't mark, it's hard to know when the end of your round is. Alright, so there's our first single crochet stitch. We're going to continue making them in that same way until we have all 6 required for our first round. So again, hold on to that loop on your hook with your index finger, go through your ring, and yarn under. So I'm going to kind of flip my crochet hook over here to grab my yarn and pull it up through that ring, then yarn over and pull through those 2 loops. So you can see that's my second single crochet stitch. There's my third. My fourth. My fifth. And my 6th crochet stitch. So you can always double check how many stitches you have by turning your work on the side and counting these interlocking V shapes. I have all 6. A quick note though, we don't count the one on our hook as a stitch. So I've got 6 interlocking V's and then an extra loop here on my hook. But I've got all 6 of my stitches here for my magic ring, so I'm ready to pull the tail. So I'm going to hold on to the last single crochet stitch I made and give it a tug. And you can see that takes the stitch that I just made and snugs it right up to this first stitch of my round, which is great because our next round, our first stitch is going to be placed inside of the first stitch from round 1. Alright, so for round 2, we're going to be increasing in each stitch all the way around. So first up, we need to take our stitch marker out, so slip it out of that stitch. And then to make an increase, we're going to be putting 2 single crochet stitches into the same stitch from the previous round. So to work our first single crochet stitch, we're going to hold on to the loop on our hook here, push from front to back through both the front and back loop of that first stitch from round 1. And then from here, it's just like how we made our single crochet stitch in our magic ring. We'll yarn under and draw through the fabric of our work. And see I'm pulling up a nice tall loop. Then yarn over and draw through both loops on our hook. And then I'm going to immediately mark that first stitch. I find if I don't immediately mark it, I forget to mark it, which is not great. Alright, so we're going to continue that increase by adding a second single crochet stitch into the same stitch we placed our first one. So I like to kind of push through the hole here in this stitch and then just make my second single crochet stitch inside. So if you look, you can see we have 2 of these interlocking V shapes coming out of the same hole, which is the stitch from round 1. And we're going to continue working. We'll kind of rotate our work, go through that next interlocking V shape, make a second increase. And we're going to just keep increasing in each stitch, which is going to give us 12 stitches, that number in parentheses at the end of our instructions here, at the end of round 2. Alright, so I am all the way around. I'm at the stitch marker, which means I'm ready for round 3. But before I get started, I like to give that magic ringtail one final pretty tight tug, flip my work over so I'm looking at the back or wrong side, and then just give it a small trim. Notice I didn't cut it all the way off. I left a little attached to the back side. I just don't like this extra bit hanging down and getting in my way as I continue working around. Alright, so we are ready for round 3, and we have some parentheses here that have some instructions inside. So what this means is we're going to do everything that's in those parentheses in the order that they appear, the amount of times indicated just outside of them. So we already know how to do everything that's in those parentheses once. We'll take our stitch marker out, put 1 single crochet stitch in the first stitch of the round, remark that stitch, and then in the next stitch of the round we need to put 1 increase. So we're going to put 2 single crochet stitches in the same stitch from round 2. And that's everything in those parentheses 1 time. We need to continue repeating that pattern of 1 single crochet stitch, 1 increase, 6 times total, so another 5 times. And that will give us 18 stitches at the end of round 3. So let's keep repeating that pattern. 1 single crochet stitch, 1 increase, there's my second repeat, 1 single crochet stitch, 1 increase. Alright, that is the end of round 3 for me, and I'm ready for round 4. So we've got another parentheses pattern. This time we're going to put 2 single crochet stitches before our increase. So 1 single crochet stitch and mark, 2 single crochet stitch, and then increase. Some new crocheters sometimes see that 2 single crochet and think, oh, an increase because I'm making 2. It's actually just saying that the next 2 stitches need 1 in them. And if you look at the next round in your pattern, we have 3 single crochet increase, which means 1, 2, 3 single crochet stitches and then an increase. Anyway, back here on round 4, we're going to continue that pattern of 2 single crochet stitches increase 5 more times for a total of 6 repetitions or 24 stitches. So 2 single crochet stitches increase. Alright, so round 4 is done for me. Moving on to round 5. 1 single crochet stitch in the next 3 stitches before that increase. So there's those 3 single crochet stitches, increase. And you're probably starting to pick up on the pattern here. We're going to repeat that 5 more times for a total of 6 repetitions. So 3 single crochet stitches, increase. Alright, that is round 5 done for me, and I'm ready for round 6, which is the last round we're going to be increasing on. 1 single crochet stitch in the next 4 stitches. And then 1 increase. And repeat that pattern 5 more times until we're all the way around for round 6. Alright, so there's that last increase for round 6. Then for round 7 through 16, we have a multi-round repeat. What that means is the instructions for every round between 7 and 16, we're going to be doing the same thing over and over. So all we'll need to do is put 1 single crochet stitch in every stitch all the way around for those rounds. So don't forget, as you start each new round, take your stitch marker out, make your first single crochet stitch, and then immediately remark that first stitch so you can remember where you are in your multi-round repeat. So that was the first single crochet stitch of round 7. I'm going to continue working until I am at the end of round 16. So I will see you whenever I get there, and we can move on to fastening off. Alright, so that's the last single crochet stitch of round 16 for me, but before we move on to fastening off, I'm going to take my hook out so I can show there is a chance that as you've been working, your piece has been working inside out. So this is what your piece might look like if it's been working inside out. Your magic ring tail's on your outside, and you can see there are these little lines that run through your stitch. If your piece looks like this, now is a good time to flip it so that that magic ring tail is on the inside of this sort of bell shape. And then your stitches have this nice tidy X shape to them on the right side. Alright, so we are ready to fasten off, and we're going to do that by slip stitching to the next stitch. So we're going to take our stitch marker out. And to make our slip stitch, we're going to go through the stitch just as we have been, both under the front and the back loop and from front to back. Then yarn under and draw up a loop. And then the loop we just created, we're going to pull it through the only other loop left on our crochet hook. Alright, so then we are ready to cut our yarn now. So we need a long tail to sew with, and I always like to have a little extra, so I'm going to cut maybe 14 inches here. And then that slip stitch that we just made, we're going to pull until the tail that we cut also passes through that slip stitch. Alright, so then I'm going to tighten that slip stitch next by pulling the tail to tighten that slip stitch down. And then we're going to add some stuffing to the inside of our tulip. But we don't want to add a ton because we're going to be closing the top of our tulip, and we don't want a bunch of stuffing peeking through the opening at the top. So add enough to fill your tulip up about 3/4 of the way. I'm also going to really push the stuffing that I've added to the bottom of the flower. Alright, so that is a good amount. Next, we're going to take our tail that we've cut and we're going to thread it through the eye of our needle. And then I like to arrange it so that the tail and the slip knot are pretty much centered through the bottom part of the flower. And then we're going to pinch the flower in half and sew across to this other side. I'm going to repeat that stitch a second time, and I'm whip stitching here because I'm going to whip back around. So I'm going to go from bottom to top a second time. You can see that kind of whips around, which is why we call it a whip stitch. So there's the first half. Then I'm going to rotate. So I'm kind of looking at like the number 8 here, and we're going to fold one last time so that these two sides come together. And then sew from bottom to top through all 3 layers here. So you can see I'm grabbing that center layer as well, the one that we've already sewed. And we're going to whip stitch again. So an extra whip stitch here, which closes off the top of our tulip. I also kind of like to mold mine a little bit by rolling it in between my hands, adding a little extra shape. And then when I have it the shape that I like, we need to secure all of those whip stitches that we've sewed. So to do that, we're going to tie a surface knot or a French knot. We'll take this loop that this yarn we've been sewing with, and we're going to make a loop here right over where all those whip stitches are clustered at the center of the petals. Then sew down through the fabric of the tulip, I guess up through the fabric in this case. And on your way up, send your needle through that loop that we made. And as you pull, that loop is going to wrap around itself and tie a knot. And I like to pull that pretty tightly. Then we'll weave this tail in by sewing it down and into the tulip, and then out through a random stitch somewhere on the body of the flower. And pull tight, which sends that knot to the inside. Alright, from here we can unthread our needle and then pull this tail tightly one last time and use our scissors to trim close to the surface of the work, which weaves in the tail, and we can discard or reuse any of the additional that we didn't weave in. Alright, so that is the flower done. Let's move on to the next part of the pattern. Alright, so next up we need to make the stem. So I've got a little bit of craft wire here. I've twisted 2 sections together because I wanted it to be extra supportive of our flower. And then I also have that pastel green yarn that we're going to be using to crochet the leaf. We're going to use this to wrap the wire so that it's the same color as the leaf. So I like to start by securing the end of this yarn to my wire. And I'm going to do that by putting a blob of hot glue here on the very end. And then just pressing this yarn to this blob. And then as it starts to dry, I'm going to start to wrap around this blob. So that gets the end of my yarn secured. And then to wrap our stem, we're going to just twist the stem while holding onto the yarn. So you can see I'm just spinning the wire here between my fingers and guiding the yarn so that it wraps nice and evenly. I find it's a lot easier to spin the wire than to wrap the yarn. And then as you start to get close to the end of the wire, I like to secure it by adding a little strip of glue. And then as I wrap, I just wrap right through it. And then press to make sure it's really tightly glued. And then we can cut. Alright, so now that I have my wire wrapped, I'm going to go ahead and get it inserted into the bottom of my tulip. So I'm going to put a bunch of glue here on the end going into the tulip. And then we're going to kind of twist and dig this wire into the bottom of the tulip and glue it in place at the same time. So I'm just kind of twisting, kind of pushing the wire to the inside of the tulip as I go so that it really supports the flower. And that gets the tulip's stem attached. So let's move on to the next part of the pattern. Alright, so the next section of the pattern is to make the leaf. So I'm going to be using this pastel green yarn, and we need to start by tying a slip knot and chaining some stitches. So let's do a quick review on how to get a slip knot tied and how to chain. Alright, so let's review how to tie a slip knot and how to form a chain stitch. So we're going to take our yarn, and I'm using white for this demonstration, so just double check you're using the correct color from your pattern. And we're going to reserve ourselves a little bit of a tail, just like we do with our magic ring. So I'm going to take maybe 5 or 6 inches or so of my working yarn here, make myself a little tail, and then we're going to take that tail and we're going to wrap it behind our working yarn. So we're sort of making like a lowercase letter B. So once we've got that wrapped around, we formed this loop here. We're going to kind of sandwich the working yarn with the tail. So bring it back around and kind of cross it over that loop. Sort of like a pretzel twist. Then when we've done that, what we need to do is draw this twist that we've just done, that strand, through this loop without pulling the tail all the way through, because that would just tie a knot. So I take my hook hand, which is my right hand, and I grab what I've laid over that loop and pull it, and then with my other hand I grab my working yarn and then pull the loop through. And the reason I form my slip knots this way is because they tighten when you pull on the tail, but not when you pull on the working yarn. It won't tighten while you're trying to add stitches to it. So once you've got that slip knot formed, you're going to take your hook and slip it inside of the slip knot, and then pull the tail to tighten it into a loop down onto your hook. Then you're ready to begin tensioning by laying the working yarn over your yarn index finger. So for me that's my left index finger, and then wrapping the rest of your fingers around our working yarn. And then I like to hold on to the slip knot itself with my middle and thumb on my yarn hand. And then we're ready to form a chain. So to chain, we'll take our hook and we're going to yarn over, meaning we're going to put the yarn over our hook, and then draw the working yarn through the slip knot we tied, and then pull up to form a nice tall loop. So that's our first chain. To continue chaining, we're going to just keep yarning over and drawing a nice tall loop through each time. One final thing though, the loop on your hook, as I'm sure I may have mentioned in the video before, that doesn't count as a stitch. This is sort of like a stitch in progress. So right now I have 2 chain stitches formed. I'll yarn over and draw another stitch through. That'll be 3, 4. And as you add chain stitches, I tend to move my middle and my thumb up closer to my hook to help me sort of tension my yarn a little easier. So as I chain, I just keep shifting my hand down the stitches that I've just created. Alright, so that's how you tie a slip knot and chain. Alright, so now that we have our slip knot formed, we know how to chain. We're going to begin by chaining 29 stitches. Alright, so I have all 29 of my stitches chained, and I'm ready to go ahead and begin row 1. So we're going to start in the second chain from our hook. So we don't count the loop on our hook. So 1, 2, we're going to go through that second chain and then make a single crochet stitch. Then we need to make another single crochet stitch in the next chain. Then in the next 3 stitches we need to make 1 half double crochet stitch. So we're going to start by yarning over. We're going to take our yarn and our hook, kind of wrap it around. I'm kind of going clockwise here from front to back around my working yarn. I'm going to go through the next stitch. I'll yarn under and draw up through that stitch, and then yarn over and draw through all 3 loops there to make a half double crochet stitch. So let's do that again. Wrap our yarn around, go through the next chain, yarn under and draw up a loop, yarn over and draw through all 3. There's our second. Do that one last time. Alright, there are those 3 half double crochet stitches. Then we need to place 1 double crochet stitch in the next 17 chain stitches. So double crochet stitch starts off just like a half double crochet stitch. We're going to wrap our yarn around, go through and yarn under, draw up a loop. And here's where it gets a little different. We're going to yarn over and draw through 2 of these 3 loops. Then yarn over and draw through the 2 remaining loops. So there's 1 extra step for a double crochet stitch. So there's that first one. Here's our second and third. And we're just going to keep adding them until we have 17. Alright, so there's that 17th double crochet stitch there. Then I'm going to put 1 half double crochet stitch in the next 3 stitches. Alright, there are those 3 half double crochet stitches. Then 1 single crochet stitch in the next 2 stitches, which takes us to the last chain stitch, which is our slip knot technically here. So then we're going to put 3 single crochet stitches in this last slip knot. That's going to kind of help us swing around this chain because we're going to be working down the other side for the other half of the leaf. So we'll go ahead and put 1 single crochet stitch, 2, and 3. You can see that sort of helps us flip around to the other side here, and then I like to pull my slip knot tail tight and then weave it in as I do the rest of the stitches on this side. So we're going to put 1 single crochet stitch in the next 2 stitches. So here's my first. I'm going to lay the tail from my slip knot over my hook as well. Make my first single crochet stitch. Here's the second. You can see I'm just going into the other side of the chain here. Lay the tail over. Then I'm going to make 3 half double crochet stitches. I've got my tail coming with me. Alright, there are those 3 half double crochet stitches. Then 17 double crochet stitches. So we're sort of mirroring the other side of the leaf here. Alright, there's that 17th double crochet stitch, then 3 half double crochet stitches, and then 2 single crochet stitches. And we are ready to fasten off, and we're going to do that by slip stitching to that first single crochet stitch that we made on the other side. Alright, so let's go ahead and cut a tail. We don't need very much, maybe 6 inches. And then pull until our tail passes through our slip stitch and tighten. Then I wove my slip knot tail in for the whole length of the leaf here, so I'm going to just give it a trim. And that is the leaf crocheted. Let's go ahead and get it attached to the stem of our tulip. So it's going to just sit right alongside, just like a real tulip's leaf would. You can kind of sandwich it and attach it at the bottom if you wish. You can paste. I'm going to sew my leaf on here, so I'm going to kind of squish it, sandwich it onto the leaf here, onto the stem here. So I'll sew through both sides. Kind of just whip stitch it a little bit here at the bottom. It's like I'm kind of cocooning the stem here at the bottom, which is great because it kind of hides that raw edge created by wrapping the yarn around the wire. So I'll sew for a couple more stitches, which looks pretty good to me. And then this last one here, I'm going to kind of pass through some of the fabric on the middle of the leaf and the stem, and then tie a surface knot, just like I did on the bottom of the tulip. Make a little loop here, and then weave this in by sewing it down through what I've sewed together, and cut. And for extra security, I'm going to add some hot glue to the inside of the leaf here so it stays pressed up against the stem until I want it to sort of arc away like a leaf. So I'm just going to add a blob of hot glue here, sort of pulling the leaf down a little bit. And then push the leaf back up and press so that it stays glued. Alright, and with the leaf glued and sewn on, this tulip pattern is complete.